Good evening, and welcome back to TheKreepingPastaK.A.T. I'm your host, Kat, though I do go by Kyle, so either one works. Now, this is going to be the third episode in my little Creepypasta Roulette live series. So, from where I am right now, I am recording live, so as usual, you'll get to hear any mistakes that I make, embarrassing and otherwise. So, in case I know it's been a while since I've last created a video, and to kind of catch up on how this works, I will go on to the Creepypasta website and I will randomize a story, and whatever comes up I will read. And all these stories that I'm going to be reading have never been read by me before. Like, I've never read through them. I don't know what they're about. I just pick them and go with it. So, yes, without further ado, let's get started, shall we? And it looks like our first story we'll be reading is called Campfire, and it's written by Daniel Martins. The drive out took a few hours. As I pulled off the main highway and onto the branching road, I was struck with the sense that I was going to be very alone out here. I'm an avid hiker, but since many of the hiking trails I'd normally frequent had become almost crowded as of late, for this trip I'd settled on a trail I'd vaguely heard of but knew next to nothing about. It led up to some serious wild territory with nothing around for hundreds of miles. The land was technically part of one of the nearby national parks, but was only barely mentioned on the park's website. I suspected this was because it was much further out than regularly visited trails, and only accessible from a branching road that pretty much led into nowhere. My plan was to head into the wilderness and camp out overnight under the stars. I live in a desert state. No, I will not tell you which one. And I figured there'd be some stunning views of the constellations and the cloudless sky at night. Especially the constellations and the cloudless sky at night, especially since it was a forecast to be a moonless night. I'd already walked the popular day trails in the area, so I was looking into something a bit farther afield. The plan was to camp out under the stars and head back in the morning. The deserted road suggested I was in the right, thinking that no one would come out this far. Should be a good chance to relax and get away from it all. Eventually I reached my destination and pulled off the asphalt off of the road and into the gravel of the parking area. Tires crunching as I slowed to stop. Sorry. Tires crunching as I slowed to stop off to one side. Parking lot would have been too generous of a title. It was really an unsealed area next to the highway with only a signpost announcing the entrance into the national park territory. The area was almost empty, only a single other car parked up. I got out and stretched, looking around and spotting the low sign that marked the trailhead. As I did, I took a second glance at the other parked car. It looked like it had been there for an age. All four tires were flat, although they didn't look to be punctured. Every surface was dusty. I looked back at my car, which was lightly coated from the drive-in, but this was well and truly caked on. There were no broken windows, and it didn't look like it had been stolen and dumped. It didn't look damaged at all. Must have been there a while, I thought to myself, wondering why no one from the park service had it towed by now. I made a mental note to call them when I got home. I opened the door to my back seat and got out my pack, hat and rifle. I'd thought hard about whether to bring the rifle. It was extra weight after all, and odds are I wouldn't need it, but Last time I'd been out hiking overnight, I'd had a far too close encounter with a coyote that left me wishing. Sorry. I thought I had a hiccup there for a second. Alright. But last time I'd been out hiking overnight, I'd had a far too close encounter with a coyote that left me wishing I had something more than rocks to protect myself with. I figured since it was only a small .22 caliber, it wouldn't be too heavy, and I'd packed it into a slight soft case that I'd fit alongside my pack. I reached into my pack for my sunscreen and slathered on Sorry, it's literally been a long time since I've spoke this much and at all, so I'm very much messing up things, but that's normal and, to be expected. I'm out of practice, what can I say? Okay. Let me start from the sentence. Okay. Alright. I reached into my pack for sunscreen and slathered some on my arms and neck before turning off my phone. I'd called my sister before I left town to let her know my plans, and stowing my keys away, shouldering my things and set off to the trail. I'd gone no more than a couple hundred yards when I slowed to a stop, noise in the air. There was a slight breeze, but it came with a hint of something behind it. I winced as the warm air hit my face because the smell it wafted toward me was terrible. It smells like something died, I muttered to myself. The breeze died down and the smell went away with it. Ugh, I said, setting off again and to pick up the pace. I couldn't see any buzzards around, but if there was something dead nearby, I didn't want to be anywhere near it if the wind kicked up again. The hike was uneventful. I won't bore you with all the details, but it was great terrain, a clear and easy trail through the desert shrubland. Some hours in, I was breathing hard as I reached a slightly hillier bit of trail. I came to the top of a rise and saw that the terrain flattened out ahead into a wide plateau. Looking at the sun, I saw it was mid-afternoon, and decided this was a good place as any to set up a camp for the night. I walked another few minutes before stepping off the trail. Spotting a nice flat bit of land where brush had been cleared away, there were the remnants of a campfire in the center, just a few bits of charcoal and some scorched ground. I nodded to myself, taking off my pack and rifle case, and placing them on the ground near the old campfire. I spent over an hour bringing in firewood and another half hour breaking it all up into manageable pieces. There was plenty around, lots of low, dead brushes and shrubs around the place. I wanted enough wood for the fire to last easily through the night. The sun was just starting to go down, and it was beginning to get a bit chilly. I stood back and looked at my woodpile. It was quite impressive, and probably way more than I'd actually need. Better to be safe than sorry, I shrugged to myself. The last ray of daylight were peeking out over the horizons as I lit the fire, building it up until it was crackling away merrily. I ate a couple power bars I'd packed as a cold dinner. I'd packed as a cold dinner, swigged some water and sat on the ground looking up at the stars coming out, feeling very peaceful. That feeling didn't last very long. I heard the wind pick up before I felt it. It whistled between the rocks and shrubs, seeming to whirl around, passing me and then doubling back before arriving. It brought a warmth with it that was odd for the desert at night. That wasn't the only thing that it brought, though. I sniffed as the breeze kicked up the flames in my little campfire and screwed up my face. That stench I'd smelled earlier came with it, hot and rotten, like roadkill baking under the sun. I gagged and tried to hold my dinner down. The campfire Sorry, let me take a sip of water. And that is the sound of my chair creaking. The campfire flared up as the wind hit it, throwing sparks in the air. I watched as they floated into the sky, bright orange spots against the black, almost blending in with the stars. As they burned themselves out, the wind died down. The flames it had kicked up lessened as well. The stench had died back as well. It was there in the background, but not being blown into my face anymore. The light from the flare-up had dimmed, and everything seemed a lot darker. I looked around and shivered involuntarily, realizing just how dark it suddenly was. I looked up at the sky and wished I hadn't chosen a moonless night for my hike. I looked back towards the fire and then stopped dead. Something was wrong. I blinked hard and looked up at the sky. The stars were gone. 1 second they'd been there, and the next they just weren't anymore, as if the wind had blown them out like they were candles. There was nothing overhead, just a sudden blackness all around, seeming to press against the dome of the light that my little campfire was throwing out. "The hell," I exclaimed, looking about me. The air hadn't changed temperature. It was still cool but not cold, but an icy sensation of unease was settling over me. I shivered again and tossed a couple of branches on the fire. There's that hiccup. Then drew my jacket closed and zipped it up, where before I hadn't faintly seen the outlines of the scattered shrub mist, where before I had been able to see the outline of scattered shrubs and boulders by the faint starlight, I now couldn't see a thing. There was no horizon anymore. The suddenly black sky blended completely where I knew the mountains in the distance were, and I couldn't see anything in the darkness that was pressing in around me. I grabbed my pack and pulled out my phone, turning it on and quickly navigating the flashlight app. The phone's flash lit up and cast a harsh light onto the ground, then flickered and died. The phone turning itself off again. I pressed the power button again, but the screen stayed stubbornly black. Shit, I thought to myself, reaching into my pack for my keys. I found the pen light on my key ring and turned that on, which immediately flickered and turned off. I whacked it a couple times to no avail, before giving up in disgust and stowing my keys and phone back in my pack. I looked around me, shivering with unease again. It was very dark. I couldn't see more than 20 feet on either side of the fire. It was almost as if the light was being forced back in on itself. I couldn't hear anything other than the crackle of the campfire. The whistling of the wind had stopped. That god-awful smell was still in the background, though, like there was something dead nearby, and what the hell was that? I heard a noise, like someone clearing their throat, a thick, wet heh. My stomach dropped, my breath catching in my throat for a second. I wasn't alone out here. Looking in the direction of the noise had come from, I saw a small flash in the darkness, and then another. A tingle ran up the back of my neck as I realized that there was something out there, sitting just outside the reach of the light from the campfire, watching me. My sister had a little dog, and I remember staying with her once, and it looked at me from a dark room down the hall while I was brightly lit. My sister had a little dog, and I remember staying with her once, and looking at me from a dark room down the hall while I was in a brightly lit lounge. I couldn't see it at all, but I knew it was there from the way the light bounced off its eyes. Dim, yellowy pinpricks in the darkness about a foot off the ground. That's what I saw was like that. Only instead of the eyes in the dark being knee-high like my sister's dog, these were 6 feet off the ground, too tall to be a coyote or even a mountain lion. I thought to myself almost absently, trying to control the fear that was bubbling up inside me. "Yeah, get out of here," I yelled, standing and waving my arms in the air. It didn't leave. Instead, the eyes came down a couple feet, like the thing had lowered its head. I slowly moved to put out the campfire between me and it moved in turn. I kept moving around the fire, and it kept moving too. I stopped and stared at it. and it stopped and stared right back. Something else was strange. My feet had crunched in the gravel as I turned to face it as it circled, but it made no sound as it... Sorry. Something else was strange. My feet had crunched the gravel as I turned to face it as it circled, but it made no sound as it moved. The darkness hid all but the barest outline, and even that was fuzzy at best. Apart from what I assumed were eyes, all I could see was a darker spot in the blackness that was... All I could see was a slightly darker spot in the darkness. Crouching, I picked up a rock and chucked it in the direction of the flashing eyes. The rock sailed through the air and I lost sight of it in the darkness, but I swear my aim was dead on. I didn't hit anything. I just heard a crunch as the rock fell to the gravel and tumbled away. The flash in the darkness bobbed up and down slightly. Whatever it wasn't afraid of me and seemed to be moving closer. Slowly, very slowly, I reached for the rifle case, unzipping it and taking out my little .22. I had pulled the bolt up and back and forth. I pulled the bolts up and back and then forward and down again, chambering around. As I did, the thing moved again, the eyes coming back and slightly lower, as if it was coiling back on itself, like a cat ready to pounce. I moved my thumb to disengage the safety, pulling the stock slightly into my shoulder and aiming for where I guessed the thing's center mass would be, a bit more than a foot below where the glint of the eyes were. "Don't make me use this," I yelled again. "Just go away." I heard a wet sound like a growl from a dog crunching with food in its mouth, and squeezed the trigger. Crack! The sound from my little rifle seemed deafeningly loud, splitting the quiet of the dark like lightning that splits the sky. I lowered it slightly, peering over the barrel towards the thing. It hadn't moved at all after coiling back. It stayed right there, ready to pounce, but there was no way I'd missed it. Not at this range. Work the bolt back, I frantically thought to myself. Get in another round. Re-aim, squeeze the trigger, crack. Work the bolts, aim, squeeze the trigger, crack. Again, crack, again, crack, again! Click. The hammer came down and onto an empty chamber. My ammunition was spent. I had only packed the single 5-round magazine, and I had nothing to reload it with. I hadn't counted on needing it as more than that. And there's my cat. Hi, kitty. The flash from its eye... sorry, where was I? My ammunition was spent. I had only packed the single 5-round magazine, and I had nothing to reload with. I hadn't counted on needing any more than that. The thing shifted slightly, growling again as it moved. The flash from its eyes and the firelight disappeared, and I lost sight of its outline. I lowered my rifle with shaking hands, switching my grip to clutch the still warm barrel like a club, ready to swing. Please get off my computer. Thank you, kitty. I lowered my rifle with shaking hands, switching my grip to clutch the still warm barrel like a club, ready to swing at the stock into whatever this thing was. Thump. I heard something solid hit me in the back of the head. I screamed and I spun around on the spot. Swinging the rifle like a bat, it whooshed through the air, hitting nothing. I stepped back, breathing as I saw a familiar glint in the dark, just beyond the border of where the light from the fire showed. It had gotten behind me in seconds, and I hadn't heard it moved at all. But what had hit me? If it hadn't come into the light, I looked down. Lying at my feet was a single hiking boot. I glanced up back towards the thing. It hadn't moved. It was just there watching me. I hadn't looked I looked back at the boot, which wasn't in the best shape. The fabric was torn and caked in reddish brown mud. Hang on, I thought as I stooped to pick it up. I shifted for a closer look at it. Blood. The boot was caked in dried blood. My head swam, and a fire tore through my nerves. The back of my neck, prickling madly and my skin turning into goose flesh. I found myself on one knee, breathing heavily as I mumbled, "Oh shit, oh shit." I looked back up. Bleh. Sorry, I can't talk today. I looked back up towards the thing, which still hadn't moved. I stood, screamed at it, "What do you want with me?" It didn't answer. I dropped the boot. I jumped, as there was a small pop from one of the branches in the fire, but suddenly was struck by an idea. I moved closer to the fire and spotted a branch that had only one end alight. I pulled it from the blaze and turned to face the thing. It growled again as I held up the branch, which rose to more of a snarl as I threw it towards it. The blazing stick lit up the night sky as it tumbled through the air towards the thing, and a horrified thrill ran up my spine as I caught a better glimpse of the outline of it, just for a second before it scuttled away from the light. It was huge, big as a bear, but without any of the mass, lean as opposed to bulky. It was dark, so dark that it seemed to flow and bend to the gloom behind it. It had 4 long legs attached to an almost stumpy torso, but it hadn't used all 4 when it moved. It used the front ones, arms, to push itself upright onto the back legs, and then danced madly away on those, while its whole body and arms jerked from its side to side. God, it was so tall, maybe 8 feet high when moving back on its legs, and it never seemed to fully get upright. The things that glinted in the firelight did seem to be its eyes, and the split-second glimpse of its face I caught was enough to make me take a step back in horror. It looked almost human but deathly wrong. Like if you took a person's face and stretched it forward so it was long, like a horse's head. The mouth, though, it wasn't small like a horse's. It stretched all the way back to where the face met the rest of the skull. The mouth was stuffed full of too far many rotten-looking teeth, stained red in places. I think my legs gave away then. I found myself sitting on the ground, hugging my knees and rocking back and forth. What in the hell was that thing? What did it want with me? The blood-stained boot didn't exactly fill me with hope that it was friendly. I used a shaking hand. Sorry for my creaking desk. I used a shaking hand to grab some more sticks out of my woodpile to feed the campfire. Whatever that thing was, it hadn't come into the light, and it moved away when the fire came near it. I gave a silent thanks to whatever urge had made me drag as much wood in as I had. The eyes had stopped moving again, and it seemed the thing was content for the time being just to sit in the dark and stare at me. I stared right back, trying to think about what the hell I was going to do, and we stayed like that for a while, looking at each other. Somewhere, not too far away, a coyote howled. The eyes turned and bobbed up and down slightly in the direction of the howl. Was it sniffing the air? It turned back to face me and it grunted. Whatever the noise was, it sounded dissatisfied somehow. The thing turned away, and again I saw the barest smudge of an outline moving off into the dark towards the howls. Within seconds it was gone from sight. As it faded away from view, so did its stench. I sat there, frozen for a moment, and then burst upwards, boots scrabbling to grip on the loose gravel as I came to my feet. I frantically grabbed at my pack and swung it onto one shoulder, stopped to pick up my rifle, and I swung it by its strap onto the other shoulder, and then I hesitated, torn by indecision. Dare I risk it? I clenched my jaw and tried to swallow down the rising sense of fear. I picked up one foot and it took a single step away from the fire, wincing as the gravel crunched underfoot, which seemed deafeningly loud in the silence that was broken by... Sorry. Which seemed deafeningly loud in the silence that was broken only otherwise by the fire. I peered around, muscles tensing with anticipation, but saw no sign of the thing. I took another step and the gravel crunched again. Still no sign of it. I relaxed ever so slightly, took a deep breath, and started briskly walking towards the trail. Once I hit it, I could turn right, and I was confident enough that I could follow my way back to the parking lot, even in the dark. I'd taken no more than half a dozen hurried steps when I stopped dead, frozen in place. I could smell it again, the reek bringing the bile up in my throat. Heart racing, I turned my head slightly to the left and saw that glint in the dark. The light from the fire had dimmed as I'd moved away from it, but I was still just close enough for me to see that familiar reflection in the flame of its eyes again. A rumble came out of the darkness, a growl. I slid my foot backwards, slowly moving back towards the fire, never taking my eyes off where it seemed to be in the dark. I reached the fireside and slid my pack and rifle off my shoulders, laying them on the ground, sitting down next to them. As I did, I heard the coyote growl again. The thing seemed to grunt, and then it faded into the darkness as it turned away from me. What the hell was I going to do? It was like this thing was playing with me, but I wasn't going to risk making a run for it again. No way did I want it to catch me in the dark. The darkness had seemed to kill my phone and flashlight when it settled in, and any flame torch from the fire I took would burn out well before I made it back to my car. I still had my lighter, but there was no way that'd make enough of a difference to keep it away. The coyote began to howl once more, but the howl cut off quickly, turning into a snarl. I listened closely as the snarls became pained and then desperate yelps, and held my breath as they cut off, replaced by sounds of something snapping, crunching, and splattering. I breathed deeply, listening as I tried to slow my hammering heart down. Nothing. Once again, all I could hear was the crackling of the fire. I shut my eyes, listening harder, and shrieked as something hit the ground next to me, scrabbling backwards on my butt away from it, waiting for it to leap up and grab me. I had gotten a few yards away when I stopped scrambling and looked and just sat there, hyperventilating, staring at the ruined pile of gray fur and red gore that lay in front of me. It was the coyote, or what was left of the coyote. It was a mess. It looked like every bone in its body had been pulverized, and its front legs were completely missing, but raggedly missing, like they had been torn away rather than clean cut or bitten off. Worst of all, its head was facing the wrong way, twisted around like it was entirely backwards. Blood seeped from the open mouth, collecting into drops that hit the dusty gravel with a soft splat. I shuddered and hugged my knees tight, rocking back and forth slightly. This must have been the coyote I had heard howling earlier, the one this thing went after. Oh shit. I stood where it was now? I circled the spot, looking out in the dark. There, on the other side of the fire, just beyond the border, where the light ended, the familiar reflective yellow double flash. It was still watching me. Fuck you! I screamed at it. I strode at the dead coyote, grabbed it by its still warm tail, and swung it forward, casting it away from the fire towards the thing. It flumped to the ground, not too far away from where the light ended. The thing didn't move. I fought to get my breathing under control, kicking dust over the small patch of blood that pooled where the coyote lay. I looked at my hands. They were sticky with blood, too. I grabbed my water and rinsed the worst of it off, wiping my hands on my pants to dry them. I heard a grunt and turned to see one long, possibly thin limb reach out from the shadows to grab the dead coyote by its tail, slowly dragging it out of the light. But it was hard to see any detail. It was almost as if it was radiating darkness out from itself. But but I could see that it seemed to end in a hand that again looked human but wrong. The fingers were way too long, and they were jointed in too many places. It looked like someone reaching out with a collection of tarantula legs on the end of a stick. It made a pained sort of sound while it was doing it. Maybe the light heard it? The coyote disappeared from view, leaving bloody drag marks in the dust. I heard horrific ripping and squelching sounds. I guess the thing was tearing it apart and eating it. The eating noises eventually stopped, and the thing grunted, but it sounded unsatisfied somehow. It went back to staring at me. Whatever this thing was, it wanted me, not just the coyote. I picked up more branches and built up the fire, then sat down and stared at the reflecting eyes in the dark. I don't know how long I sat like that for, but it must have been hours. I built up the fire a couple more times and went back to staring at the thing. It'd grunt or growl every now and again, but then it'd shut up for the time being. It seemed satisfied to just sit and stare, but eventually I found my blinks getting longer, and each time it was harder to open my eyes. God, I was so tired. The adrenaline spikes had long since worn off, and I felt wiped out. Just a second, I'll close my eyes for a second, I thought to myself as my head began to forward nod. As my head began to nod forward, I jerked bolt upright and wide awake at the thrill that ran up my spine as I heard a wet throaty heh from behind me. I'd fallen asleep. The fire had burned down low and was mostly just embers, only emitting a faint glow, just enough for me to see that thing had crept much closer as the light had diminished. I must have dozed off an hour or more. Leaping to my feet, I grabbed some of the branches from the pile and hurled them onto the remnants of the fire, and then fell into my hands and knees so I could frantically blow into the embers, desperately, trying to stir them back into life. The fire flared up as they caught alight, and I saw it sitting there way too close, squatted on its haunches like a dog sitting. Long black legs folded up so what I assumed were knees were up by the shape of its head, arms extended down to the ground in front of it, holding its torso upright. The light glinted from its eyes as it shifted its head and stared at me again, and hissed as it pushed itself backwards, retreating away from the light. As I lost sight of it in the darkness, I heard a wet sound again, like a long tongue smacking against its lips. I shuddered, and I had gotten a better look at its eyes in this light this time. They were almost filled with hunger and pain, but there was an intelligence there, human eyes, not entirely those of an animal. It went back to looking at me, only this time it wasn't silent. It kept growling and grunting, and its noises grew in volume and frequency. It almost sounded desperate. It circled the fire, eyes disappearing from view and then reappearing somewhere else, where it would growl from the dark, but it never came into the firelight. I didn't say anything, I just fed the fire and hoped that my stock of firewood would hold out a little while longer. I'd brought in a lot, but it was diminishing by this point. Then finally the thing made a noise I hadn't heard yet, a hiss higher in pitch than anything else it made, and it looked up at the sky before staring at me once. It made a small, sort of, sorry. It made I cannot speak today, so bear with me here. It made a disgusted sort of noise and then turned away. I heard the wind kick up and I could smell the stench again, and then all of a sudden it was just gone. As the thing went, the smell and the suffocating darkness went with it, and I realized I could see clearly around me again. The sky that had deep dark blue color you see before the sun rise. The sky had that deep dark blue color you see before the sunrise, and I could see a few pinpricks of light that could have only been stars. It got progressively lighter and lighter until there, the sun peeked up over the horizon, and I'd never been as happy as to see the light of day as I was now. I waited another hour and a half until the sun was well in the sky and things were starting to heat up before I dared to make a move. I picked up my things and got the hell out of there, shuddering as I passed the remnants of the coyote, and just a bloody patch of gray fur and shattered bones. I jogged to the whole time, never pausing, never stopping, never looking behind me. Every time I slowed, I'd hear the wind whistle again, and I'd catch a whiff of something foul, so I'd pick up the pace again. Hours later, I was just about to reach my drop when, there, the start of the trail, I could see down to the car park. Without stopping my jog, I reached back and pulled my backpack off, holding it in one hand and awkwardly cradling the gun case in my other arm as I scrabbled in the pack for my car keys. I almost tripped as the hard trail gave way to the gravel of the car park, but managed to keep my footing as I scrambled towards the car. I fumbled with the keys for what seemed an age before throwing open the door, tossing my things across and slinging myself into the driver's seat, both hands gripping the wheel with a white-knuckled grip. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror and was taken aback by the haggard, wild-eyed figure that stared back at me. There were rivers of clear skin and the dust caking my face. I realized I'd been sobbing with relief since I'd been able to see the end of the trail. I looked back at where the trail started and saw the dust from the path swirl and the wind pick up once more. I hurriedly rammed the keys into the ignition. I gunned the engine, throwing the car into gear, pulling out around quickly and peeling out into the road. As I sped back towards the city, it wasn't until I hit the main highway before my heart stopped pounding and my breathing slowed to normal levels. A few hours later, less than the time it took me to drive out there, I was not doing the speed limit. I was home, with my doors locked and the sunlight streaming in through my windows. My phone turned on after I plugged it in. "Now you work." So I messaged my sister so she wouldn't call search and rescue. A day or so later, I called the Park Service and told them that I had been stalked by some mountain lions on the trail, and they removed the area from the information section of their websites. Nobody went there really anyway, they said. I didn't mention the abandoned car or the bloody boot and didn't tell anyone what had really happened. After all, who would have believed me if I did? There was no point in sending anyone else into danger. Later, I started reading up on some local folklore, but it stopped pretty quickly. I came across something that made me start to shake at the description of it. I'm fairly sure I now know what that thing was, but I decided I wouldn't look into any more. But I decided I wouldn't look any more into it, and I just try to put it all out of my head. It hasn't really worked. My breath catches in my throat every time I go into a dark room while I fumble around for a light switch. I don't hike much anymore. If I do go hiking, then it's strictly along well-used trails, and I never, ever do an overnighter. I had work transfer me to a branch, long, long away from the desert. I couldn't deal with feeling hot wind anymore. I'm somewhere now where it snows. My encounter has left me with a lot of unanswered questions, but one question ranks above all the rest, and it's something I'm not really sure I want to know the answer to. If that thing I read about is real, then what else is real and hiding out there in the dark? Alright, that's the end of the story. So, now let's go to the Old Faithful button. You'll be hearing me scrolling in the background probably. So try to scroll back up to the top to the button. And let us see what goes on now. Just waiting for it to load. Loading and loading and loading. And a pop-up ad for some reason, okay. No thank you. That's actually funny timing because the story that popped up is It's called Seriously with a question mark, and that's exactly what I was thinking as the ad popped. So maybe it's fate. I don't know, but it was some great timing on that part. So I guess without further ado, let's start the story seriously. And the credit goes to Truncheon. Truncheon. I'm so sorry if I'm like saying this really wrong, but it's Truncheon. Truncheon. That's what I'm going with. Alright, let us begin. A man and a woman walked out of the bank, hand in hand. This might be a normal thing for anyone, maybe even you, but not for her. The man made a typical throwaway remark about their lunch plans. Under usual circumstances, this would be just interpreted as a feeble attempt to incite a lightheartedness into the conversation, but not for her. With a quick, agile movement, the woman, his wife, picked up a slab of concrete by the sidewalk, and with great aim, hit two doves perched on a low-hanging branch. They fell like two pathetic white balloons. As soon as they hit the ground, his wife beat them into a pulp. She could see that they were still breathing, and her husband knew that he fucked up again. Some passerby began to stare openly at the horrid sight of the two ash birds. "Linda," her husband yelled, "stop it." "I thought we were going to kill two birds with one stone," she replied, in a voice of unnatural calm. Her face gazed up at him from the ground, static, rigid, like some dread mask. She had a certain, mental illness is a bit of a euphemism, but let's just say she had a disability. A serious and rare one. Linda could not understand the difference between jokes and imperatives. She took every figure of speech as she heard seriously, and was often compelled to make whatever it was into an actuality. Her husband recalled one point when she nearly pushed him out of the window when, in light of the recent resignation of his business partner, he remarked that he was in fact flying solo. Linda wasn't always dangerous, though. Sometimes he'd go home only to find her giggling like a little girl at the sight of milk on the floor, or maybe even staring out the windows during rainy evenings. Or maybe even staring out the window during rainy evenings to see whether any cats or dogs were falling from the sky. But then came the times when she would get harmful. Only last month, the pediatrician living in the apartment next to theirs got pelted with apples and other fruits. The poor woman nearly tripped down the stairs. This other time, an event which still scared him up till now, she shoved in his hands a bit of her bloody scalp, saying it was a piece of her mind. She had to wear a bonnet whenever she had to get out of the house after that. In spite of all this strange and violent behavior, he still loved his wife very much and could not bear to send her away to a mental hospital. His mistake. He became very careful around what she would see or hear coming from anybody since the episode with the birds. Much to his joy, a year and a half passed without much incident, and their firstborn child was soon to come. It was good since the coming of a baby took their minds off of whatever financial problems they had. He was away when it happened. After he heard that the child was born, he rushed back home. As soon as he stepped through the door, he knew that something was wrong. His wife was calling him from the kitchen. In her arms was the son he would never know. In the light of their kitchen, laying on the table, were the remains of their baby. Their baby. Its mouth was stretched open into such a degree that it split open, the undersides of its jaws seen. It reminded him of a tear in a cloth, the seams not made of fabric, but of flesh. What little blood the baby had to spare was everywhere. In response to the child's grotesquely expanded mouth, his father's jaw fell open in surprise, and terror and disgust, threatening to do the same. A scream tried to come out, but did not. Forcibly thrust into the gaping hole that was the baby's mouth was his wife's forearm. She seemed to be trying to claw something As soon as his wife spotted him, she turned in his direction. The bloody baby still stuck on her arm. "You have to help me. The doctor said he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth." And that's the end of that story. Alright, it looks like that our next story will be haunted. And it looks like that it was written from Vogue. I don't know if I'm saying it right, but in case I'm not, it's spelled Vaughn. Let me scroll back up to the top of the story. Alright. It's your first night in your new apartment. Your stuff is still in boxes. Your furniture, with the exception of the mattress on the floor, hasn't arrived. The utilities won't be turned on until the next day, so you're making do without. A flashlight and some candles will do for light until you go to sleep. Despite the creepy feeling of the dark, empty apartment all alone. Despite the feeling of being in a dark, empty apartment all alone, you chalk it up to nervousness and try to get some sleep. A sound wakes you up. You lie there for a moment, waiting to decide if it was real or just your imagination being too loud. When the sound happens again, you check your cell for the time. 2 a.m. You get up, use your cell phone for light, make your way towards the kitchen, the apparent source of the noises. At first, you think somebody has broken into your apartment, but you choke down your reaction as you stare at the figure. It's a middle-aged man wearing what amounted to striped pajamas, standing in front of the microwave with his back to you. Although seemingly solid, you can also see through his body. You're paralyzed, mostly out of fear, but partially out of curiosity. "Hey," you finally manage to say. The man looks in your direction, turning slowly. Your eyes open wide as you realize the man has no lower jaw. Letting his tongue hang free, your vision loses focus and the apparition disappears. A sound wakes you up. It's your cell phone vibrating against the floor. It's morning, or at least light is coming through the window. You're back on your mattress and the missed call is from your mother. You're confused about the night before and still shaking from the experiences of what you saw. Was it a dream, or did you really see a ghost? That is the end of that story. It looks like our next story will be late night television, and it is written by Insanic. Or Insaniac. Either way you pronounce it. It is Friday evening. Your parents are away for the weekend, and they left you in charge of looking after your little brother while they're gone. At age 17, you're more than capable of making sure a 9-year-old doesn't get himself killed. Even though it's a quarter until midnight, neither of you had hit the hay yet. At the moment, you're in your room catching up on some homework, and he's downstairs watching television in the living room. Your bedroom is directly above the living room, so you can hear the TV through your thin floors. Every action movie, every reality show, every infomercial comes in loud and clear to you. It used to annoy the hell out of you, but you've grown accustomed to working with the sound in the background. It hardly ever gets so clamorous as to be distracting. If it does, you just descend your house's only set of steps and ask whoever's down there to lower the volume. Or if you're feeling lazy, you just holler the request at the floor. They usually can hear you. Although you're focused on your work, you're quite aware of what your brother's watching. You think it's a vintage You think it's a vintage crime drama or something. At the moment, you can hear one character, presumably a mob boss or something like that, bragging about how his gang is going to thrash the rivals in an upcoming brawl. "We're going to pound them till they look like newspaper, black and white and red all over." Your brother roars with laughter at that one. Only a kid with his level of maturity could somehow milk a chuckle out of that overplayed pun. You got that right, Lupo, said one of his underlings. You got that right, Lupo, one of his underlings exclaims. Another character says with a timid voice, I ain't sure if we go through this. I don't know why I required a accent for that. Okay. Another character says with a timid voice, I ain't sure if we go through with this. Sorry. I can't seem to read tonight. But that's, hey. Another character says with a timid voice, I ain't sure if we should go through with this. Don't really seem right to me. More laughter from your brother. He got a problem with the plan, the head mobster. That's totally a word. You got a problem with the plan, the head mobster asked. You can tell he's ticked. At this point, you're beginning to lose concentration on your work. You're curious as to what the show or movie is about. To answer this question, the other answers tentatively, no, I just think we oughta. His words were cut short by what sounds like a scuffle. There's a shout and then a succession of whams, like someone is being bludgeoned with a baseball bat. Your brother giggles again. You have no idea what's supposed to be funny. And on a second thought, by the way, if you hear a noise in the background, my heater just kicked on, so I thought I should explain that. All right. You have no idea what's supposed to be funny. The reluctant character who's ever being roughed up keeps begging for mercy, but the one hurting him does not relent. The strikes just keep coming. The victims let out one final plea, but fall silent after you hear something snap, like a broken bone. A sickening crunch immediately follows, accompanied by yet another bay of laughter. After clearing his throat, the leader speaks again. Anybody else have any objections? He asked. No one does. In the silence, you can hear your brother's snickering. The boss speaks up again. Well, glad that's out of the way, he sighs. Aw, geez, now I'm all bloody. That line gets your brother in stitches. He must not get what's happening. If he thinks that's funny, you think. Give me a towel or a bucket of water, Frankie. The honcho orders. Then we can toss this piece of crap out into the street. Even the rats gotta eat, am I right? Your brother bursts out laughing like he's just heard the funniest joke in history. This time your brother's hysterics continue for a little less than a minute, growing noisier by the second. This is getting weird. You feel a little sick to your stomach. Your older sibling instinct kicks in and you realize your brother shouldn't be watching some freaky murder flick so late. He shouldn't be watching it at all, really. It'll give him nightmares. Heck, if the thing is as brutal as it sounds, it'll probably keep you awake at night too. Yelling at him to come up and go to bed yields no response. Stubborn kid. You try again. No reply. Perhaps he'll fall asleep on the couch. You decide to go downstairs and carry him up to his bed. You push away from your desk and leave your room. The noise from the TV stops abruptly as you walk downstairs. The noise from the television stops abruptly as you walk down the hall towards the staircase. Downstairs it's dark. The TV's not on. Your brother's not on the couch in front of it. You call out his name. No one answers. He's not on any of the rooms on the ground floor. Suddenly alarmed, you sprint upstairs to his room to peek in. You find him snoring loudly in his bed next to his nightlight. He must have gone to sleep a while ago, since there's no way he could puff snuck past you from downstairs undetected. In any case, you're relieved that he's all right, and glad he wasn't poisoning his mind with some horrific late-night televised drivel. Positively relieved, until you realize that there's no way he could have been watching the television only a few minutes ago. An icy chill runs down your spine. You hear laughter behind you. It's the same laughter from the downstairs that you'd assumed to belong to your brother. Now it's much closer. Okay, that's the end of the story. So we're going to pick one more story for the night. Well, by pick the random story kind of thing, I mean, of course, I'm sorry, it's a little late right now, so I'm a little bit, off. Alright, so for our final story, it looks like we're going to be reading Too Early to Trick or Treat. In my opinion, trick or treating is the best. I loved trick or treating as a kid so much. I grew up in a really small town, but like trick or treating was everything. Like I remember one year that essentially it was almost blizzarding in New York, and still like I stayed out. I was devoted to it. I did it, but like, and I regretted it afterwards because it was so cold. But then I got home and I had all that candy, and I was like, you know what? This is a win either way. So yeah. All right. You probably, if you're still listening this far in, sometimes I'll go off on a random note or whatever. You know, that's what I think is really fun about doing this live. And, with you hear any mistakes, you hear reactions in real time and everything. And I think it's a good thing because, when you're actually editing things out for real, like you have no idea how much stuff you'd actually attempt to edit out because, you know, I mess up a lot with the way I speak because, I have this thing where, I never really talk that much growing up. So, later in life, it's affected me to a point where I tend to mess up words like just, what I read aloud or, just having a normal conversation. And, it's one of those things too that, this is good practice for me and, builds up confidence. And, I realize that there's, like, obviously there's a lot of, other people out there with podcasts and, YouTubers that read creepypastas out there, and I love a lot of them, but you don't see them doing this live thing, where everything's actually in. And I thought it would be a nice change. Like, I mean, personally, I like to listen to the stories straight on, but lately I've been, listening to more, crime podcasts, stuff like that, and I actually end up liking the banter sometimes, depending on the chemistry. And, I think this could be a good thing with creepypastas, like, at least for the Roulette version, where, it's all out there. And, eventually maybe I want to do reactions to stories on it, but I don't know. That's something to see for the future time. And, I wanted this episode to be, a bit longer than the other ones because I haven't done so in a while. And by now you're probably noticing that my voice has changed quite a bit. Like, I don't know. If you've, watched my first video that I posted, and if you're out watching this on YouTube, obviously, but like if you watch that, like it's vastly different from where it is now. And I'm not sure, I think that I mentioned it before, but I am transgender, where I'm female to male, and I've been on testosterone for about a year and a month now. So my voice has gone through changes, and there is some cracks and stuff here and there. And so you'll hear that very much over through my channels, with everything going forward. I think that's pretty cool too, like the whole process of that. Like, I looked back on my first video and I was like, wow, I don't even remember my voice being that, like that, I don't know the word that I could use for it, but that like different from how it is now. Because like back then I'm like, oh, my voice is deep, enough, like a deeper feminine voice, at that time. And now I'm just like, wow, my voice was actually pretty not deep at all, So it's pretty good on that. And on different note too, like with these podcasts and stuff that I do listen to with the creepier things. I do tend to listen to them at work, so this is one of those things too where like if somebody is at work listening to like sometimes a little break from a story some people like, some people don't, but I kind of wanted to play around with this idea. Like I have made videos where I just do the story and that's it, and I might still do some of that. I have music projects and stuff on there as well, and I also am a writer as well, and so far all the books that I have written were written using my birth name, which was Kelly Ann Todd. And, I'm very open that that was my birth name and everything. And, I have fully changed my name to Kyle Alexander Thomas, which I'm also very open now about. And, it's out there. And, I did not like my birth name. It did not resonate with me in any way, obviously. And, you know, I don't want to go back and change that stuff because, I was still, I guess, under that kind of identity wherein I was writing that. So, moving forward, I want to include the new name and that old information in my books as I move ahead. So it's, you know, so it, I don't know, sorry. But, so that it's, out there, and, I know that it's a sensitive subject and I don't want to I don't want to go into a rant about this, so I actually don't know how I got so off track with doing this, and I apologize. So I should pretty much just get back to the story. So, I should do that. Let me take a drink from my water. And if you, by the way, any background sounds you might have heard, any background sounds that you might have heard, I do have neighbors above me. I do live like next to a road, so there's probably like cars and neighbors and dogs and obviously like the heaters and stuff and day to day stuff and all that. Not to mention the beautiful creakiness of my desk and chair here and there because, well, there it goes. All right. So I'm so sorry. Let me get back to where we were. So, all right. I believe that I already mentioned this title, but I'm not sure because I went way off track. So, in case I didn't already, or, in case I forgot, or, you forgot or anything, the story title is Too Early to Trick or Treat. And this story was written by. Let me scroll down. Alright, the story was written by Hoodquest. I'm in desperate need of help. If anyone reading this could please give me some insight, it would be greatly appreciated. I'm aware that some, or most of you, may be hardcore horror fans like myself. That's why I'm coming to you with a serious problem. I have always been a fan of horror. I always enjoyed a good jump scare or a creepy feeling to cheer me up. I don't know why I read cheer there, but honestly, same. Alright. I'm going to start that sentence again. I've always been a fan of horror. I've always enjoyed a good jump scare or a creepy feeling to keep me up. However, what I have been going through for the past 10 years is something I can't understand. I am a 40-year-old man. I'm happily married. I have 3 children who all go out to different universities. Every year, my wife and I would get extremely excited around the fall season. We would. The reason for that is particularly because we both love Halloween. We would always spend a good few grand on decorations and candy. We were known as the go-to house in our neighborhood for scoring a motherload of delicious treats. However, as I mentioned, something strange occurred 10 years ago. One night, my wife and I were enjoying a little quality time together when We got an unexpected knock at the door. I answered it and was nearly knocked off my feet from the sudden scare. When I opened the door, I was greeted by a large person in a yellow rabbit costume. They looked like a mascot. At close examination, the costume was a little unsettling. The head of the costume contained massive cartoon eyes and ears that were quite long. The whole costume was pretty impressive. It looked like one of those full body costumes you just couldn't find in a store. It was one of those suits that you would have to pay a pretty penny for online. The bunny had held a small jack-o'-lantern bucket in his hands. He proceeded to hold it forward without saying a word. This is where the problem comes in. This happened to be the early part of September. As you could imagine, we didn't have any candy to give the poor fellow. I didn't want to be rude. I just thought that this could have been a confused person. There's no way it was a child. The person was huge. They have been at least 6.5 feet. They would have had. They had to have been at least 6.5 feet. I'm sorry. It's a little bit early for treats. Oh, why don't you come back in October? We'll definitely have something for you then, I said. The bunny simply looked down at his empty bucket, turned his back, and skipped along toward the street. Naturally, he found the situation quite bizarre. This wouldn't necessarily be a cry for help if it ended there. The next time it was late in December. The snow was practically pelting down on the town. That's when we received a knock at the door. I answered it and was greeted by the bunny-suited individual again. The suit looked visibly dirty, as if it hadn't been taken off in who knows how long. The funny part is, the person never came to my house on October 31st. Not a single time. I tried to be nice again and told the person that there was no candy. I told him that he should probably find a shelter. I told him that he should probably find some shelter from the blizzard. There was no way I was going to let him into my house. The next time it happened was in the middle of January. At this point, I was quite frankly getting a little bit irritated and uncomfortable. I even informed the local authorities of this guy. I could legally say he was harassing me in my house. All these years, the police never came up with anything. I let this go for 5 years before we decided to move. One time, I even answered the door with my gun and threatened violence. Apparently, that didn't intimidate him even in the slightest. After we moved about 2 miles on the other side of town, we thought it was over. For a few months, nothing happened, until one day I got a knock at the door. I didn't think it would be him because everything seemed fine. We didn't have any problems for a while. However, when I answered, it was surely the costumed rabbit person again. His costume was completely filthy. I could see large accumulations of dust and spider webs. I could even see little spiders crawling all over his body. It was as if the costume was beginning to rot. No matter how many times I threatened violence or snapped on the guy, he would always come back. This is what I needed help with. This is what I need help with. A few days ago, he came back. I was reluctant to answer the door. It never worked before anyway. This time when I answered, I could see parts of... This time when I answered, I could see splats of a dried red substance along his mouth and torso. I just wanted this encounter to be over with, so I reached into my pocket and handed him some peppermints. Surprisingly, he shook his head to say no. I have to admit that I'm stupid. For the first time in 10 years, I asked him the question I never thought to ask. What do you want? His body went still for a few seconds. Then he extended his bucket toward me and gestured for me to look inside. I nearly vomited at the sight. Inside his bucket there was a heart. For my own conscience, I choose to believe it wasn't a human heart, but I have doubts. In an act of defense, I punched the bunny right in his face. His soft cotton head went flying off into my front lawn. When I saw what I saw then has kept me up ever since. Under the mask, there was nothing. There was no person. It was just empty. I looked over in the yard at the discarded head. I swear, for a split second, I saw the head blink. Before I could even process what happened, the body ran towards the head. It picked up its head and ran at an inhuman speed. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to deal with this. I could honestly use some help. I've gone to the police. I've gone to my kids. Everyone thinks my wife and I are crazy. I'm desperate for help. I'm afraid that my life and that of my wife's are on the line. Why? Because this morning something was written on the front. Because something. Because this morning something was written on my front door. See you on Halloween for one last time. I'm taking this as a threat. We've already decided that we'll be leaving the town for Halloween. I don't know if it will matter. What if it finds us like it did the first time? Why is it coming for us? What the hell even is it? If anyone has any solution or answers, please let me know. Halloween is quickly approaching. We are running out of time, and if a big yellow rabbit comes to your door on Halloween, or any time, slam the door in its fucking face. Alright. That is the end of that story. And that concludes literally the... Okay. That concludes the episode, essentially, for the night, because I believe now this has run over an hour or so, which was, my goal. If you have stuck around this long, I want to say thank you for listening. And, I apologize once again for taking so long to put out something. Life, happens and gets busy, and, we go through everything. So, I won't make any promises about, keeping up to date with things. I'll just say this. I will make videos when I can. And I know it's not a very favorable thing, but, as much as I would love to make a career out of this and do this, because I truly enjoy doing this, I also work, like, a regular job, and that takes up so very much of my time. And, I am very thankful for the job I have, but, it makes it hard to pursue the passions that I also have. So I will post whenever I can, and I'll leave that explanation at that. So thank you for sticking around and listening to my banter. And, if the random noises in the background and the changes of, room tone and frequency and all that bugs you, I'm sorry. And, maybe this series isn't for you. And I get that. I truly do. It's not for everybody. So, no hard feelings there or anything whatsoever. So, thank you for listening and stopping by. And I'll catch you on the next one. And I believe, I'm trying to remember what I end the videos with, but I think it is, thank you for sticking around to have a chat with Kat. Stay spooky, my darklings and cats.